That's when you look at Iran. Iran is a very, in terms of idealism of the people of Iran, they're very Western-oriented. They do have had experience with the Western world, whether it's Europe or the United States. The advent of satellite TV obviously has kept a connection. The internet has kept a connection. The Iranian people as a whole are very educated people. There are obviously minorities, as you're saying, that are more pro the administration because there's a fear, obviously, of religion and not following God's word. And there's no question that these fundamentalist leaders have played off of that fear within constituents in more remote areas of Iran.
By the way, guys, if you have any questions for Shire, and in case you missed the top of the show, his family is all from the country. They left Iran in 1979 during the revolution, came to the United States, got political asylum here in the United States. His father was the chief of staff for the Shah's imperial army. He spent some time in France. Your father was subsequently assassinated, and you now live here in the United States. So if you have any questions for him, send them right away at strategyroom@foxnews.com. I have a question for you already from Tom in Colorado. He wants to know how widespread is the revolution there? Are demonstrations taking place outside Tehran? Because he says we seem to know really only about what's going on in Tehran.
No, it is. I mean, again, it's again in more urban environments. It's easier to flow information out of those parts because there's more accessibility to internet and other forms of high-speed communication. I think the problem has been in some of the more remote areas. There has been protests, and shows like Fox have done a good job of showing some of those movements. But again, it is more widespread in the more urban areas of Iran. Tehran, obviously being the capital, has been a center for the revolution. But it's been more focused towards university students and younger movement in terms of the audience who's been really spearheading this initiative.
What about, we heard this morning that Mousavi held a meeting with these 70 university professors, and they were all sort of in the same, going the same way. And apparently police detained 70 of these university professors, and we don't know where they are. And a lot of the stuff we're not able to confirm because journalists have either been kicked out or they've been detained. So all this information is a little bit sketchy. But what does that say to people over there when you have these, professors? How harmful can they be that are detained?
Again, it's a wrong decision by the regime. If they're trying to control stability, what they're doing is again feeding the fire.
You really think so? You don't think that people will get so scared of that, especially if these guys disappear for a while?
There might be a temporary. I mean, that's their hope. Their hope is to create that fear. Whether it's family members of Mr. Rafsanjani, who's been clearly an opponent of the supreme leader, or family members for Mr. Mousavi. This is a tactic by the regime to create fear that they will do something, create harm on their family if they continue protesting.
If they're successful in quelling protests, which I had heard that they were getting smaller and smaller, just the bloodshed and the cruelty has been unbelievable. If they're successful in that, where does Iran go? What happens?
Again, what will happen now is that a movement has started, whether it's as vocal and out front as it has been during these rioting. I think the people of Iran have arisen to the fact that this administration that's in power, this regime, the system of government is flawed. And my hope is that, as I said before, that a clear strategy is delineated and an ideology set up for a change in the country, and a mass movement is created. Clearly there has been a significant movement. There have been protests, upwards of 3 million people that have gone on, but it needs to be much more of a strategized plan that is moved forward, not just a protest against election.
Some conservatives have criticized President Obama for not being tougher in Iran, and it's taken him quite some time to finally issue some harsh words in the direction of that country. What would happen if President Obama was tougher on the country, and what would happen if he, just kind of kept his mouth shut?
Well, it's a difficult balance. I mean, I think from one end, the regime in Iran has tried to use the United States and the Western world, especially the United Kingdom and the United States, as an engine for them to continue to create the sense of nationalism within the country. For Iranians in more remote areas, they have this fear of the United States, that Iran is a threat because they are labeled as an axis of evil, or there is these Western powers who do not like the United States, don't like Iran. I think that the president has to play a fine line. Obviously, you can't support a regime that is allowing active brutality of innocent civilians when they're trying to protest in a civilized manner. These are not protesters who are trying to create situations where they're vandalizing areas or using weapons. These are people that are walking in the street trying to carry a message that they're not happy with what has gone on in this election. And it hasn't even been a movement that's saying, let's topple the regime. It's been a movement saying, we want our vote to count. That's been what the voice has been doing.
You're right. Michael, have you seen any polling, and it may be too soon, but any polling here in the United States on the president's reaction to this?
I actually haven't seen any polling, but I think I think Obama has to walk a fine line with what he does in terms of what message we're projecting to Americans, what message we're projecting to the world, and what we can actually do in Iran. I mean, there's probably not a point at which the U.S. military is going into Iran.
Right.
Right. And so absent that, right now, what are we going to do? What threats are you going to make that are really you're willing to back up? I mean, I think there are economic sanctions, there are political sanctions, and I think you should be going very far down that road. But when you're the president of the United States, you got to be careful not to make promises that you won't be willing to follow through on.
I've been really surprised by how much coverage this has gotten on all the networks. I mean, typically, U.S. television networks are reluctant to go full steam ahead on covering international events, especially international events where the U.S. doesn't have troops. And I think the news organizations have actually done a pretty good job of covering this to make sure that this is an important story.
Well, I think that's because Obama did finally take a hard line with Iran by uninviting them to the 4th of July barbecues.
Right. Did everybody hear about that? Yeah, there was a note that went out to all the embassies.
To that. Who was it? Wasn't it Major Garrett who asked that question?
Major Garrett asked that question at the press conference.
And he wouldn't commit to uninviting them to hot dogs.
Well,
I was like,
Hillary Clinton sent out a cable to all the embassies and places overseas, and I think here in the United States too.
Iranians.
See, any invitations that you have extended to Iranian diplomats for the July 4th events? No.
That's why he wants an apology. No potato salad for you.
A question for you. This comes from Bob in Phoenix, Arizona. He says, common people in Iran, how do they feel about Israel? Because we hear from Khomeini, we hear from certainly Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, from the mullahs, that they hate Israel. What's the reaction of the common people?
No, again, I think that the president comes out and makes these speeches to kind of focus on the sentiment of this whole revolution of Islam in Iran. I don't think that the average person in Iran has a distaste for Israel or the Israeli people. I just don't. And I can tell you from the people that I have relationships with within Iran who do extensive traveling, they are fully in support of Israel. The idea of stability in Israel and Palestine is a major, major goal of theirs. I think people are tired of this fear that's been tried to be portrayed by the regime in terms of Israel and Palestine. I think attention needs to be focused on creating a solution where these people can go about creating a stable environment to live and to start having hope for their future, to build on fundamentals like education, where their children, whether it's in Palestine or Israel, are able to go and coincide together and not be fearful of each other. I think it's grown out of proportion.
Can I ask you a question? You paint a picture of an Iran that's much more pro-Western than has until now been portrayed in the press. How did Ahmadinejad get elected the first time?
Well, again, what his election stood for was, again, back to the theme of the first revolution. Here's a man who came up to be the man of the people, that he was a simple person who was very much like the average Joe would be in our society. And his tenets that he preached was that. It was an ability where people could start to relate to the guy, that he's not some high-flying politician who speaks in verbose language that people couldn't understand. They can understand him. You see him, he's always dressed very casually. He was the mayor of Tehran. He had great support in the sense of what's gone on since he's become the leader is that he's been focused so much on foreign policy and not focused on correcting the problems that Iran had faced, which is huge.